you wanna die with me, as if we're going to die, as if you're gonna die with me, as if we're going to die. The less you have, the more you need it.
Hello lovelies, it's me, Baroki. I'm an artist, a musician living in Paris, and today I'm going to talk about 3 things that make Paris very different to Sydney. So, the first thing, and this is going to be a quick video, yeah, because I'm a bit run down actually, got a lot going on. Quick video, here we go. So I'm going to talk about 3 things. I'm going to talk about paperwork, or bureaucracy, which is also kind of tied to technology. Food, which is very important if you're going to talk about France, but yeah, there's a reason for that. Maybe it's a cycle, you know, anyway. And finally, more broadly, culture, in terms of sort of philosophy and politics, based on my encounters with human people. Yeah. So here we go. So paperwork, first of all, bureaucratic stuff is much less efficient, at least in terms of how many forms you might have to fill in and where you might need to send them and all this kind of thing. In Paris, it's much less efficient. There are lots and lots of government bodies that all kind of deal independently from each other, and as a sole trader, I'm sort of dealing with several of them, and you're sort of entitled to all sorts of wondrous things, and so that takes me more to the philosophical culture stuff. But you know, the healthcare system is a bit like the Australian one in that most basic stuff is free, which is really cool. But of course, if you're new here, you got to deal with an agency that provides you with the credentials to get that stuff. It's a place called Amélie, which is kind of health insurance, is what it calls itself, but you're entitled to it as a citizen or a resident, and they're probably great. But I sent off my materials to them, and was actually my materials got turned around. So I'm going to try and actually, a very good practice in France is to show up to the building, never send off mail to people, and that brings me to the technological side of paperwork, which is mail is much in use, fax still gets used. It's very much like living in the 90s or the early noughties in terms of the emphasis on the mail system for forms, where most agencies in Australia will deal in online forms. A lot of stuff needs to be done with hard paper in France. However, and this is a bit more philosophical culture, the fact that so much paperwork needs to get done. For example, as a sole trader, I need to declare my tax every single month. I have to declare my income every single month, and pay tax on it, and pay quite a lot of tax too, like a fifth of my income kind of goes to that. I don't know if that's not, maybe even a quarter. It's a lot. However, since there's so much bureaucratic sort of nonsense that goes on, there's a lot of stuff that could be done more efficiently. People are very warm, especially in bureaucratic situations most of the time. And now I might have a different experience to someone who doesn't speak very good French, because I speak quite good French, good enough that people tend to be very hospitable towards me. And I think maybe if you don't speak as good French, maybe people are in general just a little bit more hostile, or maybe just can't understand you very well, and it's not nice to not understand, it's not nice to not feel understood, and so maybe that experience would be different if I didn't speak quite decent French. Next thing. So that kind of brings me, maybe at the start I should have said paperwork, philosophy, and food. How about that? Or paperwork, culture, and food. Anyway, that really brings me to my encounters with people. And so at various government agencies, people have been incredibly kind and warm and as helpful as you could quite expect them to. I've just definitely had 1 or 2 encounters that haven't been like that, but my broad experience has been people really want to help and are very lovely, even when they don't know you. However, you have to be prepared for the more critical and straightforward approach of French folk, which is, for example, they're not being mean or rude, or they're probably not, it depends on the person. If they, for example, correct your grammar on the street, like if someone hears you talking, overhears you use bad grammar in a cafe, they might just step off, while walking their dog and be like, it's so and so. They might correct you, and that sort of stuff, that sort of reaching across what I perceive as a kind of stranger barrier, a certain most strangers aren't going to talk to most other strangers. That feels more common in France, but I think it's an act of warmth, an act of connection. People are actually caring for each other and for their culture. They have a real pride in the French language, which is why they want you to speak it properly if you can. And they do this in other respects too. They'll tell you to, I don't know, walk on the right side of the road, or hey, you're... one lady, told me I was standing too close to the entrance to the metro and I was blocking the way, which I didn't think I had been, but it's quite common for people to just kind of express that way, in a way that I think if you express yourself that way in Australia, it will always, or it will almost inevitably be perceived as rude or unpleasant. Whereas I think in France, when people are doing it, they're not necessarily expecting to be perceived that way and not intending to come across that way. Of course, it depends. But yeah, there's this directness that I think a lot of strangers might perceive as just rudeness, but I think it's actually a commitment to truth and communication. But I could be wrong. I could just be experiencing a lot of rudeness and be like, aren't people lovely? But it's a nice way to live and it hasn't caused me any problems yet, so I'm going to keep perceiving that way, because I think I've got that impression right. And certainly my experience is more intimately with humans, so my sample is quite biased. I've mostly encountered people as their piano teacher. That's mostly how I meet people. I've taught a lot of students, mostly adults, although increasingly kids. And they've all been very warm with me and very happy to correct my grammar, which I've invited, by the way. Like, I want to get better at French. But yeah, it's been quite encouraging meeting at least these people, and obviously that's a very particular sample of people. It's people who can afford and who can afford and desire piano lessons, which is quite a particular group of people when they're adults, particularly, but at any time. But these people, the adults of this variety that I've met, have seemed strikingly, to me at least, coming from Australia and coming from like the art scene in Australia, which I feel like is quite committed to being left wing, and I think that's sort of biologically normal if you take voting patterns as manifestations of like biological phenomena, which I do as a generalization. People tend to vote their temperament, their psychological temperament. So people who are higher in conscientiousness and lower in openness tend to vote conservative, and people who are higher in openness and lower in conscientiousness, which just tend, like, if you're higher in conscientiousness, you tend to be lower in openness, or at least vice versa. The higher in openness definitely seems to correlate with lower in conscientiousness. You got your voting patterns kind of set out to a certain degree, by the personality that seems to be relatively static throughout your lifetime. These traits change a bit. I'm talking about the big 5 traits, by the way. So your big 5 traits seem to predict quite well how you're going to vote. And so if you take it like that, it makes sense that the open people, the people high in openness is pretty much creativity, according to Jordan Peterson. It makes sense that they're going to be left wing. That's how it happens. But my experience in Australia was people were much more team left wing politics. A lot of my friends are really quite wedded to a particular political ideology. They think that there is a right, correct way of operating across many, many complex problems, and that is the left-wing way, say. It's the way that tends towards a breaking down of barriers and an equality of experience of life and kind of stuff like that. And in France, at least the people I've encountered, maybe they're just centrists, but I think the educational system here might have something to do with it, because they're quite big on philosophy throughout high school, especially in the later years. But people tend to be much less wedded to their politics, identify less with their politics, and be a bit more balanced, a bit more understanding of the validity of diverse perspectives in politics. That's something I reckon I've noticed, and they've also been very, very warm in a special way, a way that feels unfamiliar, but lovely. Like they tend to be quite polite. I think kids are really brought up to behave with their bodies in very particular ways, especially around authority figures. I have one child student who, every time I stand up, she stands up, and she waits until I've sat down to sit down, which is extremely cute. I pointed it out one day, but I didn't actually ask her not to. I just said it's very polite of you to do that. Finally, my one other sort of deep encounter with some people, it hasn't been that deep, but I've had 3 rehearsals with a band that's going to play my music, two people, a drummer and a bass player, and they too are deeply warm and generous in this very special way that I'm like regularly taken aback by. I'm like, wow, that is very generous at the time. They were even after only 3 rehearsals together, willing if necessary to invest money in the project, and just assuming that we would make it back, which I just found really quite startling, that they would actually come out with that. I didn't even have to ask if they would be open to that. So, and I should add, I don't think in doing that they were doing something like British culture might expect, where there are a lot of unsaid conventions where you might be expected to offer in order to be declined, and it would be rude not to offer, and it would also be rude to accept on my side. I don't think it was like that, but I'm hoping not to accept anyway, just because I've got some other ways of sourcing some money, or I hope I do. Maybe I should accept. Maybe it's better to all be invested that way. We'll wait and see. I might be broke after my wedding anyway. So, well, yeah, I have no idea. I have no way to segue beautifully into food, but let's talk about food finally. So, as you might well have heard, if you've heard really anything about France, their food is very good and very particular. You can get fresh, astonishingly good bread in many forms, and in sandwiches filled with yummy, salady, meaty stuff. Like every few hundred meters in Paris, really. If you Google boulangerie, bakery, if you Google bakery, the Google Maps image of Paris is bristling. It's just full of them, and it's the same for brasserie. Say, I guess they're just casual restaurants where you can pick up some lunch. You can sit outside and smoke, as so many people do, in the sun. Casual restaurants, a place where you can reliably get a steak and like a soup of the day and that kind of thing. And pretty much no matter where you go, all that food is astonishingly good. It's kind of like if you went to a nice French restaurant in Australia. yeah, it's not that there are heaps of those, but if you went to one of the few that exist in, I know there is one in Canberra, and I think there are a couple in Sydney. So yeah, a very high quality of food, and I guess it's connected to culture because, because people do seem to value different things here. There's I recently watched 4 episodes of Emily in Paris, which was actually fantastic. I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it was good stuff. It may not be like high art or something, but I think it's very good for what it is. Good drama. And well researched in terms of American and French culture. But yeah, there's this great scene in there where a co-worker kind of talks to Emily, who's trying to fit in and struggling in her new workplace in France, in Paris, and tells her that she doesn't understand. She seems to he says to her, seem to live to work, whereas we work to live. And she tells him that she loves her work, and he can't quite make sense of it. What, you love work? What do you mean? And I think that attitude really rings true. It's like a stereotype, of course, or like it's simplified, but people here, I think that's why one of the reasons that the paperwork is so bad is no one's engaged, or not many people are engaged enough in their work to really feel like improving the system is a worthwhile part of their time. They'd rather knock off early and go to lunch, which, just as caricatured in Emily in Paris, it does go for a long time. Lunch breaks in France, I think, normally go for 2 hours. You if you want to get something printed or you want to go to the bank or something, it's usually shut from at least 1 till 2:30, but often 12:30 to 2:30. That's just a common that's a common lunch break where businesses actually shut in order to go and have a really nice lunch with their friends, usually, or maybe by themselves, but they take the time to really enjoy food, and the food's really good, it's really enjoyable. So there's this wonderful culture built around enjoying the pleasures that are daily available to you, which I think is a very valuable philosophical idea, and kind of like communal eating is this thing that I think we're kind of losing in Australia. Still, I think a lot of families like to eat together once a day around a table. I think that's still a thing, but here it's really, you might do it twice for starters. You might do dinner and lunch, and lunch certainly gets more emphasis. But yeah, you can kind of feel this connection of community between the people, and it's quite hard to explain, but people seem connected by something a bit deeper here. I don't know if it's historical, I don't know if it's religious. I think it's probably a huge combination of lots of different things, but I feel that, and I'm gonna miss that when I go back to Australia, or I'm gonna try and build that and really put myself in situations that allow me to feel that connected to people. So there are clearly some downsides to living in France, but if you can get across the language barrier, which I'm not necessarily claiming to have done, I think I've done enough to be welcomed, but not enough to feel like I truly belong, or feel like I'm being understood or understanding things fully, because words have so many implications. You know, every word I'm saying to you here contains multitudes of implications of historical stuff. They might refer back to the Bible or further, and different. Yeah, a language is a really special thing because it contains so much stuff. Like one word, like even if it's even if it's not a noun, if you say squirrel, and then in French you say écureuil, which is the word for squirrel, you're going to conjure up for different people some vaguely related cluster of pre-experienced stories about squirrels and possibly people who've been said to look or behave like squirrels and all this stuff, and they're going to be radically different in English to French, because even the sounds sound like squirrel sounds like Quirrell, which is the guy in Harry Potter, one of the bad guys, I suppose. Écureuil sounds like, I don't know, fauteuil sounds like couch, but squirrel doesn't sound anything like couch in English. So yeah, languages are pretty crazy in the way they refer, they explode outwards in shards of meaning. So that's my experience of 3 or maybe 4 or maybe 17 billion things in Paris that are worth knowing, I think, if you're going to come here. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I think I have. Be good to those you love, eat good food, get outside. This is something said at the end of a podcast that I won't mention. I'll just leave it to anyone who knows. Or maybe you can Google it or something. It's a mystery. But do those things if they're good. If you want to. You don't have to. Leave comments. Please talk to me. Please ask questions. Tell me if your experience is different, if you live in Paris. Just critique my hair, if you like. It's rather bouffant today, rather massive. Like, subscribe, follow. I have a Patreon. You can Google Baroque Patreon if you want to give me money. I've just started a Discord called Baroque's Bouncy Castle, or BBC, which is funny on multiple levels, I think. Talk to me. Lots of love. See you next time.
It's as if you wanna die with me, as if we're going to die, as if you're gonna die with me, as if we're going to die. The less you have, the more you need it. Poor are as greedy as the rich. I'm not saying we're all the same, just in different ways. We're equally desperate, and you say that perfectly, with the smile of a hungry dog, as if you're gonna die with me, as if we're going to die. Making friends with death is so important, but you together makes me jealous. Together makes me jealous. Who do you want more? You've no Well, if you wanna smile with me, if you want me to smile, hell, I'm gonna smile with you. die